We're now up to tape 19, and we're talking about democracy. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be discussing its traditions, its characteristics, and a couple of bizarre facts. All right? So, first of all, democracy means the rule of many. So, the concept is there's a lot of people who participate. It's important to know that there are several traditions within democracy, and let's go through those. The first tradition, and these are called traditions. The first tradition is a tradition of individual dignity. Each person is important. That's really what it is. Each person counts. We see this in a lot of different ways. For example, you look at the current spate of young black men who have been shot by police officers. The anguish that many people in the community demonstrate about that killing, those killings, indicate that that person who died had dignity. But it goes beyond that. Look what happens. Look how the government has to respond. In some cases, for example, in Louisville, the city government is paying $20 million to the family of the victim, and they're making changes. You don't do that unless that person had value. Yes, they're killing them. They're killing people they shouldn't be doing. But even in death, there's an acknowledgement that this person has dignity. It goes another step. Look at what happens when the state of Texas or any other state decides it's going to execute someone. First, it's a huge deal, often involving cases that go all the way up to the Supreme Court. Secondly, what happens is that the state actually keeps track of what the person says, what the person ate as their last meal. Their last words are important. Their last meal is important. Why is that? Because that person has dignity. So, a key tradition in a democracy is this concept of individual dignity. Number two is the concept of equality. And, just a cursory look at the United States in our history shows that we have struggled with this more than anything else. Okay? We've really struggled with the idea that all people are created equal, even though that's what it says in the Declaration of Independence. We are all equal. How has that played out? This has caused more problems than anything else. But you know what? At the core of it, at the core of all the arguments, at the core of all the discussions, the debates, even the protests, violent or nonviolent, over racial equality, gender equality, sexual identity equality, is a simple thing that equality matters. Equality matters. There is this concept that we are equal. Okay? But how is that played out? And how does that play out against other concepts that we might believe? Okay? Number three. Number three is participation in decision making. There is this concept, a tradition in democracy, that people participate in decision making. In the end, it's the rule of many. How is that possible unless people participate? And how do you participate? Number one, you vote. But even deeper than that, it's not just about voting, even though voting is incredibly important. It's also about reading about what's going on. It's about talking about what's going on. It's about watching videos about what's going on, watching the news. All of that is part of participation in decision making. Okay? A tradition of democracy. Number 4, the last tradition, is a simple one. Majority rules. So, it's very simple. Okay? You're going to have disputes. You're going to have debates. In the end, you have to resolve them. And we resolve them in this country under the concept of majority rules. Majority is defined as 50% plus one vote. Notice, and that's the bare minimum. That's a bare minimum. That's a simple majority. Notice I didn't say 51%. I said 50% plus one vote. Okay? So what we're talking about is just having one slight percentage higher than your opponent. So if, for example, we were talking about a vote and there's only 2 candidates, okay, it is possible that one person could get 50% plus one vote, they would win, and the person who lost would get the equivalent of 50% minus one vote. So one vote short of 50%. The one who gets 50% plus one vote is the winner. That is how our democracy works. You don't need a supermajority. You don't need 2/3. You need this. Okay? Now, these are the traditions. These are the traditions. But we need to take the next step. Beyond traditions of a democracy are also characteristics. Characteristics of a democracy. So you're traveling someplace and you go, is this a democracy or not? What kind of characteristics do democracies have? Well, it turns out when you look around the world, there's things democracies have in common. So, for example, one is a concept of a limited government. Okay? Think about what we talked about with all those governments that Thomas Hobbes was like. Well, the government would get in your face. The government would go and be concerned about who's marrying who, how many kids you're having, that sort of stuff. A democracy, no. There's a limited government. The government backs away from a lot of that. The government here does not tell you what kind of job you must have, who you will marry in most cases. Government really backs away from that and gives us some freedom. That is a limited government. And that's a concept seen in democracies all around the world. They believe in this basic thing, limited government. Number 2, most governments have a constitution of some sort. Some sort of constitution. Okay? So, it's a written document that lays out what the government does and what it doesn't do. Our Constitution is 4 pages long, the United States government Constitution. 4 pages long. Pretty simple, basic thing. All democracies have it written down someplace, with one exception. And that one exception is an interesting one. It's Great Britain. Great Britain does not have a constitution. What they have instead is a series of laws that have been passed over the last 800 years that lay out what their government can and can't do. So you think about the Magna Carta, you might have heard about that. That was the first one that established the idea that, hey, the people have some say in what's going on. So their laws become a constitution. Just about every other democracy actually has a written document. Ours is available. You can get it online. If you want to see the original, go to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. It's right there on display for you. Next. And this next one is a confusing one. This next one is called institutions. Institutions. It's the concept that we are ruled by law and not by people. Okay? So, rule of law is another way to put this down. Some would argue this is in fact the most important thing. Rule of law versus rule of men, of people. Okay? So, here, let me explain it very simply. Okay? When is Donald Trump's term of office up? Regardless of whether he wins or not, when does his first term in office end? Well, guess what? It ends January 20th at noontime, 2021. His first term in office ends that day, at that time. If he wins the election in 2020, he will be starting a new term on January 20th, 2021 at noontime. But his power ends on that day. He can get sworn in again for a new term if he wins. Or if he doesn't, he's done. Okay? That is the rule of law. It's not Donald Trump who determines when his term ends. Just like it wasn't Barack Obama or George W. Bush or Ronald Reagan or George Washington. It is the Constitution and this idea of institutions that we are ruled by law. Okay? So these are the basic characteristics of a democracy. All right? Now, last thing, 2 bizarre facts about democracy. Pretty simple stuff. One of them is that democracies, well, they really have never had a famine. It's really weird. All the other types of government have had famines. I'm talking about not just hunger, but I'm talking about starvation, where there's no food. And just every other kind of government has had famines. But democracies haven't. Some of them had some hunger, but they haven't had a famine. And why is that? Really? Nobody has any idea. There's theories. Democracies all have, press, media, news media, and maybe their existence keeps food flowing to people. I don't know. People are really struggling with this. But it's one of those questions. Why don't democracies ever have famines? Okay? And second bizarre fact about democracy is that if you look at history, no democracy has ever fought a war against another democracy. Okay? They've never fought a war against another democracy. Really strange. There is one possible exception. I've got to put it out there. And that is the Civil War, the American Civil War. The North and the South fought each other. And the question is very simple. Were they a democracy? Okay? I talked to the historians here at McMurray University. They say, yes, the South was a democracy. If that's true, then this is an exception to this rule, this bizarre thing. Why don't democracies fight each other in war? Good question. Don't know the answer. All right, so that concludes number 19, tape number 19. And next up, we're going to be talking about different types of democracy.